Dolly Curtis, and today I'm visiting with Andy Koch, and we're going to have a chance to talk about Gustav Whitehead and the early history of flight in our country. And this is a subject, Andy, that's pretty dear to me, and I know to you too, so I thought we'd have a chance to share it with the audience.
Thanks, Dolly. As you know, back in 1982, you and I both attended a lecture at the Fairfield Historical Society by Bill O'Dwyer. And at that time, he told about the history of Gustav Whitehead, and it really got me interested. When I saw the pictures of the Gustav Whitehead airplane, it looked like a big hang glider to me.
Now, had you had experience in flying that you were there that day?
Yes, my experience was mainly in hang gliders and ultralight airplanes. I was teaching people to fly hang gliders out in back of Roger Ludlow High School on Sturgis Hill. Oh. And I thought that this just looked like one of my hang gliders. And I went up to Bill O'Dwyer after his lecture and I said I thought I could build that plane and fly it. And he said that he thought it was a good idea and that if we could in fact fly this, it would help to prove that Gustav Whitehead did in fact fly back in 1901.
Well, maybe we better stop and tell the audience a little bit about the history to this whole situation and some of the investigation that you and other people have worked so hard on together.
Well, as you know, Gustav Whitehead is alleged to have flown in Fairfield on August 14th, 1901, along Fairfield Beach. There was quite a bit of evidence, at least I think there's a lot of evidence. Bill O'Dwyer, who wrote the book History by Contract, thinks there's a lot of evidence. And Stella Randolph, a woman who got interested back in the early 1930s, wrote a book called The Lost Flights of Gustav Whitehead, and that was published in 1937. And in that book, she interviewed a number of people who saw Gustav Whitehead fly. And she came to Bridgeport, and she talked to some of the helpers who worked with Gustav Whitehead. She talked to his family, to his wife, and so on. And she was totally convinced that Gustav Whitehead did, in fact, fly in 1901.
Well, Andy, at that meeting that night, I sat next to people who were elderly who told me that they were there, that they were watching or they were helping Gustav Whitehead haul that plane up the hill on Tunx's Hill.
That's right. Well, Gustav Whitehead flew in a lot of areas around here. He flew right here in the Captain's Cove area on Bostwick Avenue and Hancock Street. In fact, he lived over on Pine Street, right where the West End Moving Company is right now. And so many of the people from this neighborhood saw Whitehead fly up and down the streets. He took some small hops, maybe just 2 or 3 feet off the ground in testing his airplane.
Well, what seems to be the problem that he hasn't ever received the recognition?
Well, that's hard to say, Dolly, because it did appear in the New York papers, it appeared in the Boston papers in 1901, and the editor of the Bridgeport Herald was here and saw Whitehead fly and did a full-page article on it. So I don't know exactly why he didn't get credit for it. In Bill O'Dwyer's book, he mentions that there's a contract that exists between the Wright brothers and the Smithsonian that forbids the Smithsonian from saying why anyone ever flew before the Wright brothers, or they lose the Wright brothers airplane. And he seems to think that that has a lot to do with it.
Andy, so has this man actually been written out of history?
Well, not really, because in Europe, in many of the countries, they consider Whitehead the first to fly. And you'll hear more about that later from Doc Gunther and from a young junior high school boy who did some research also on this. He found that Whitehead is given credit in other countries.
Yes, I knew that he has in his own home country. He was a German immigrant, right?
That's correct. He was born in Leutershausen in Germany.
But in his own hometown, they have a museum.
That's correct.
In his honor, which is really something to think about, that we haven't really even have any area here in Fairfield. Would it be Fairfield or Bridgeport?
Well, we have an area right here. Actually, this hangar that Kay Williams built at Captain's Cove, this is the site where Whitehead did a lot of his research. He caught birds right here. He did some of his test flights right here. We even have a picture where he landed in Black Rock Harbor, and they were pulling the airplane out of Black Rock Harbor, which is this area right behind us.
I even saw a film. Somebody took the time and did a dramatization on his life that I saw at Sacred Heart.
That's correct.
Do you know what that's called?
That was a docudrama. I forgot the name of it offhand. Wind Crossing, I think it was called. And it really is not absolutely true.
Right, it was a dramatization.
Right.
So, but tell me a little bit about the plane now, because I know you spent the last couple of years with the help of Kay Williams and then a lot of other people I've met who've helped work on this replica.
That's correct. After discussing this with Bill O'Dwyer at that meeting in the early 80s, I really wanted to build this airplane and try to fly it. And so I mentioned it to Morgan Kaolian, the airport manager, who's a friend of mine. And he mentioned it to Kay Williams. And Kay was very supportive. He offered us a building building here at Captain's Cove when he was first starting up this area. And we didn't jump at the chance right away because I didn't have the finances. And so a short time later, Kay said he would build us a hangar, the one you see right behind us.
Now, why did you want to build it, though? Is it just that?
Just for the fun of it. I just wanted to build this thing and see if I could fly it, because I was a pilot and it looked like a lot of fun to do, and that was my main interest at the time.
So tell me what happened then, because now it's practically built, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, then Kay Williams offered us a hangar and $10,000 to build this airplane. So now we had financing. So we went out, bought some wood. I got one of the local boat workers around here who was a boat builder, Steve Haddock, a young fella, and he helped me lay out the plans for the fuselage, which is kind of boat-like, as you can see.
Right, it is.
And we started building this airplane, and slowly but surely people started straggling into the hangar and offering their assistance. And one of the very best helpers, and my right-hand man, is Bill Wargo, who actually built most of the airplane. He was a retired industrial arts instructor and a carpenter, and he was also a model airplane builder, and so he was a perfect guy to get involved in this. And his older brother, Jimmy Wargo, actually knew a friend of his who saw Whitehead fly. And so I got the two Wargo brothers interested, and then from there on, we just got different people coming in at different times offering their skills.
So are these people very much involved, and it's an intense thing with them to try?
I think it is. I think it's become more intense as we go on. It took us 2 years to build this thing, and then well, about 2 years to get it flying.
Well, it's beautiful. I think we should just, if we can, just take a quick look at it, and maybe you could tell me a little bit about it.
Sure.
Some of the details to this.
Okay, well, the most obvious detail is these large, beautiful wings, which are made of silk.
They are beautiful.
And the struts that support the wing are made of bamboo. That's a Calcutta bamboo, a very strong bamboo. The fuselage, the boat-like fuselage, is made of Sitka spruce and is covered with canvas. So the entire airplane is really fairly light. It's only around 500 pounds in weight.
Now, what about all these guy wires that seem to hold, and they look very important, too.
The guy wires are important. These are stainless steel guy wires that we use just for ease of construction. Whitehead used piano wire, but we found it a little simpler just to use this stainless steel wire and use Nyko swages and so on. But the basic shape and form and dimensions are exactly the same as Gustav Whitehead's airplane.
And what happens now? Do the wings go up and down? Is this all controlled
No, the
by
wings
these?
don't flap. This is not an ornithopter. It's just like a regular airplane. These propellers get spinning very rapidly, about 700 RPMs, and this is a modified steam engine that Whitehead used. And when we flew the plane, we used modern ultralight airplane engines, but our engineers, Don Richardson and Wes Gorduke, are building a steam engine like this, and Wes has carved some better propellers. These are just plywood propellers, just to show you the general shape of the
So that's
propellers.
in progress.
That's in progress, and we expect that we'll have that ready within a couple of years, and we'll fly this airplane again. We've already flown it the length of a football field down at Bridgeport Airport.
So were you the pilot, Andy?
Yes, I
You
was,
were.
fortunately, the pilot. Because of my ultralight airplane experience and my hang gliding experience, I was able to shift my weight to help control the pitch of the airplane. And
It's that sensitive then? And
it is very
weight.
sensitive. The pilot stands right at the center of gravity, so if I just move backwards one step, the nose of the airplane comes up in the air, and if I move forward one step, the nose comes down. And we did have some wires hooked up so that we could warp the wings to get a little bit of a turn if we needed it. But our goal was not to really turn and fly all over the place. We just wanted to duplicate, or at least to beat the flight of the Wright brothers that you hear so much about, where they went 120 feet, which is not too far. We went 330 feet on December 29th in 1986.
Now, the time that I heard Mr. O'Dwyer speak, he said that the Wright brothers had come to visit Gustav Whitehead while Gustav Whitehead was working on his experimental first flights.
Well, that seems to be the case. In one of Stella Randolph's books, she mentions an interview with Mr. Steeves. He said that he was there when the Wright brothers showed up at Gustav Whitehead's shop and went in and talked to Whitehead, and then he spoke with Mr. Whitehead after the Wright brothers left, as a matter of fact.
So they were both, or the three people or other people were all working simultaneously on early flight.
Oh, there were many people.
Many people.
Working on early flight back then. Sure. There were, in fact, in the hangar I have a book by Octave Chanute, which I could show you later on. It's Well, I've got it in the hangar. I'll get it out later. And you can see that, and it's a compilation of all the early experimenters in aviation. And the Wright brothers were lucky because they had Octave Chanute as a helper at the time. He was guiding them and telling them what everyone else had done.
Well, do you think that Gustav Whitehead maybe was so intensely working on his vision of putting this plane in the air that he wasn't spending enough time thinking through what he had to do to copyright or to protect himself? Do you think that's what happened?
Absolutely. He didn't have any money, and he was more interested in just flying. He wasn't concerned about the business aspect of the whole deal, and that's kind of what did him in later on.
Yeah, but that's probably the true spirit to the person. That would be the more genuine person who would be just so involved in trying to figure this thing out. He was so far ahead of his time.
That's true. He really wasn't looking for credit. He wasn't looking for money. He just wanted to fly.
Now, I knew somebody who has no longer alive, Mr. Knapp, and Mr. Knapp told me he was a neighbor of Gustav Whitehead in Fairfield, and he told me that this crazy old guy was in his garage working on these contraptions all the time, and his family were really, you know, suffering because there was not enough money in the family even for just the necessities of life.
Well, I guess that's true.
So
he did have to spend quite a bit of money trying to build this airplane. I mean, it's not cheap to buy the materials that you need, and it takes a great deal of time, and you can't work a job and build an airplane.
Well, it was just interesting to me to be talking to somebody who was telling me about Gustav Whitehead as just somebody who lived in his neighborhood, that he passed it off as just a crazy kook, you know, that was working on these contraptions.
Well, we have people come in here to the hangar every day who tell stories like the one you're talking about. They say, my grandmother told me about this, or my grandfather saw this happen, and there are so many people who saw Whitehead fly in this neighborhood. In fact, last year, you may have seen in the paper, there was a Gustav Peschel who celebrated his 100th birthday, and I went and interviewed him, and he saw Whitehead fly up in the Tunxus Hill area also, and he said he helped pull the airplane up Tunxus Hill, as a matter of fact. And there was another fellow who was in a nursing home over in Milford here.
Well, Andy, what can we do, those of us that live in the area, to try and help rectify some of these things? I mean, is there anything we can do? You once said something about finding a recent piece of evidence in the dump that had just been thrown out recently.
That's right. A friend of mine, actually my nephew, met another young fella he was living with, and this young fella found an actual letterhead of Gustav Whitehead at the dump.
Recently, though, this...
Recently. This was within the past 2 years.
So what do you think happened for that to have appeared now?
Well, I think that people clean out their attics and their cellars and throw stuff down at the dump. And here came a piece of evidence that we could, you know, was really nice to have, just floating around at the dump. And there are probably people today who still have in their cellars and attics evidence that Gustav Whitehead flew. And I'll bet that some of these photographs and maybe diaries of different people in the area describing Gustav Whitehead's flights are still around. And if people would only look through some of these things, it would help us out a great deal.
Well, where would they get in touch with you? I mean, how could they reach you? Or
right here at Captain's Cove, where we keep the airplane. If they just call Kay Williams, he'll get in touch with me, and we'll
and you'll come down and talk with them?
Sure, either me or Doc Gunther, who's very interested in the program.
Even if it's something that they think is not so significant, it could be. It could be really very helpful, wouldn't it?
That's correct. Just come on down to Captain's Cove and see our airplane and talk with us.
I myself am very interested in this subject, and I know you give lectures about it occasionally.
Yes.
And people should know that when Andy gives a lecture about Gustav Whitehead, that's an exciting experience to hear the whole history laid out in an hour's time, which we don't have. I'd like to meet this young person you told me who won the History Award for a work that he's done on Gustav Whitehead. So could we stop for a minute and introduce me to him?
Yes. A few months ago, I got a call from a young fellow named Scott Whitehead. He had the same last name as Gustav Whitehead, and he was interested in doing a story on Gustav Whitehead. So I gave him all the evidence that I had, and he wrote up his paper and did this competition, this History Day competition, and won first place in the state of Connecticut. And I'd like you to meet him now.
Good.
Scott, come on over here.
Hi, Scott.
Now, this is Scott Whitehead.
So you are the namesake for this wonderful Mr. Gustav Whitehead.
Yep.
But you're living at a whole different time, 90 years later or something to that effect. So tell me about your project.
Well, several months into school last year, my history teacher announced a competition. I decided I was interested in the competition itself, paired up with some friends, and at the last minute my friends dropped out. Well, I still wanted to do it, so I had to come up with a topic, and Gustav Whitehead popped into my mind, and I decided to follow through with it.
But how did you hear about him? Had you ever heard Andy speak on the subject?
Several years ago, I did a genealogy project where I traced my roots. And as I was talking to my grandfather, the name came up. And I gave it some thought and put it in the report. But I didn't do a whole lot on it. And then now I remembered it and I decided to follow through with it more.
So is he in your genealogy? Is Gustav Whitehead part of your past, or is it
I'd like to say yes.
I'd like to think he would.
I can't prove that right now, but I'm working on it.
Okay, that's a good thing to do. Well, tell me about the report then, exactly.
Well, the report was really a quick overview of all the evidence we have. And it really went to try to prove whitehead flu.
That was your premise then? That's what you were trying to prove in the report?
Yes, I tried to prove that, and again, it's very difficult to do. But through several sources, I was able to do an excellent
We all know he flew, though, because of the Bridgeport Post reporting about it in 1901. So we all knew that. So where's the hang-up on this thing? Is that we don't have any photographs of the man in flight?
Well, we have heard rumors of photographs of him in flight, and there have been people who say they've seen him fly, and so we're trying to put all this together and still looking for some solid evidence.
Well, with as many people as you, with all this interest working on this subject, I think we're going to succeed. I really do.
Well, we have to do more than just build the airplane and more than just do reports. A lot of this is political, and that's where Senator Gunther comes
Right,
in.
exactly.
He did a great job in getting us lots of help.
I would like to talk with Doc about it and get some of his views from his point and see what he can say to add to this discussion. So let's stop for a minute and do that.
Okay.
It's an added pleasure to have Doc Gunther with us today to add to this story. Hi, Doc.
Hi, how are you, Dolly?
How about you introducing yourself?
Well, it's easy enough for me. I'm the senator from the 21st District in the state of Connecticut, and that represents the towns of Shelton, Stratford, and part of Monroe. I've gotten involved in this little project here with Andy and them because close association I have with Kay Williams and his projects down here. This was very interesting because there's many people in Stratford, incidentally, and in my district that have had a long history of being involved trying to take and get some recognition for whitehead. I never really got deeply involved in it until these people started to build a plane. And when we got in here and talked to some of their experts and that, and seeing the type of work they were doing, the type of research they were doing, the type of documentation that they were doing.
It's very thorough, I know.
Very thorough. So that I felt that there ought to be something other than this, and this man, and reading over Randolph's books and the various books that have been published on Whitehead, I thought this man deserves his place in history. So I carried the ball up to Hartford and had a resolution passed by the House and the Senate and signed by the governor requesting the Smithsonian to give a hearing to us relative to the information we already have and the documentation we already have. Smithsonian has had rather a cavalier attitude over this. I went to Washington, talked to the head of the Smithsonian. Oh, that's immediately after I got the resolution through. I thought at that time that we had an agreement that we would have a forum. When I say that, I'm talking about 3 or 4 experts that the Smithsonian would bring in, let them sit down, let us go in there and document everything right out there and produce it for them. Incidentally, not a Roman circus. We wanted to take and have a really studied background type of investigation that I think, very frankly, Smithsonian should have done a long, long time ago.
Well, don't they have the resources to do it too? I mean, they have so much in their files, background material, that whole era in this flight. I would think they would have the resources.
Dolly, when they spent over $100,000 to build a miniature, or I should say, a replica of a pterodactyl, to have it fold up in a flight out there, I think they could have spent at least, let's say, $10,000 to $20,000 is what they were telling me that I'd have to come up with in order to have what do they say, a scholarly investigation. This means getting a person with a historical background who would come in and take their information, compile it, and then go in and present it to them. They in turn would then take that documentation and go over it and try to find out whether or not there was a claim there. Now, you know, the mission of the Smithsonian Institute in the United States is to pick up all these new things, these historical things, to investigate them and to document and come up with the answers.
It really does make you ask yourself the question, why? Why are they not interested in this information when so many people here are?
Well, it isn't just here, Dolly. This is all over the country.
And in Germany too. I mean, the man has a museum in his honor in his own hometown.
It's a small museum, but nonetheless, that's his birthplace. They have some of the things that he had over there. They've got a lot of the documentation we have. They have some few things that we don't have over there, which we'd like to get back over here. But basically, you know, it's all here. This is where Gustav Weiskopf, who turned into a citizen, got to be Whitehead, who developed everything here as an American citizen. I feel strongly that part of this problem is every time they'd go into trying to do something to get some recognition for him, he'd hit that at a time in history when we were at war with Germany. And I think that had some influence on this. I don't want to say we have bigotry and that sort of thing.
It's really hard to know, Doc, though, why they're holding back on looking into his life. And they say, I gather, that they don't have photographs of the man in flight, so they can't prove that he's been in flight. Or there's just so much complication to the whole thing that I've heard in lectures.
See, Dolly, it isn't only that. You know, historically, there's a publication, The Inventions and Technology of the American Heritage, okay? This is back in spring of '87. You know, the whole thing, the feud between the Smithsonian brothers and the Smithsonian.
You want to show it to the camera, maybe? It'd be easier?
Fine. This is done by one of the curators down at the Smithsonian that gives the 20-year history that the Wright brothers had fighting the Smithsonian Institute. And incidentally, if you wonder why we at times get a little bit queasy about this whole thing, the Smithsonian actually modified and rebuilt Langley's plane and tried to fly it in order to discredit the claim of the Wright brothers. Now, you know, you can almost parallel that with Whitehead, because we've been, well, since 1936 they've been trying. Incidentally, a lot of people don't realize it, but officially the Wright brothers were only accepted as the first in flight since 1948. It took them 20 years to establish that claim. The door of history should never be shut. And I think they've shut the door on Whitehead. I think that they should be doing an in-depth study of this. I think they should be up here going after every bit of information we have. And incidentally, questions that I get in my mind, why didn't they come here when these people were alive? Stella Randolph was down there banging on our door trying to get them to do something back in 1936. Why didn't they take and come up here and see these people while they're alive? Why didn't they document what they have? Of course, that photo, as I understand it, the Scientific American Exposition, those photos were supposed to be turned over to the Smithsonian. There's one missing, and that's that white blur that we can document that shows a white object up in a tree line, which would definitely look like it's Whitehead's plane.
So, Doc, now what's your next move? What's going to happen next?
Well, so far, of course, we haven't gotten Smithsonian's attention, apparently. I think what we have to do next is the engineers have been working on the development of the engine and the replica of the engine itself. It's in the process now of being built. This might take a little time, but when those engines are completed and they're on this replica here, and we take that down and fly that, at that point, I think we have reason to go back to the Smithsonian and say to them, here it is, in toto. We've got the engines of the type, we've got the replica of the vehicle, and it flies. Now let's take and pay a little attention to Whitehead.
I could just see this, Doc. I'm having this vision of you people flying right into the mall and landing right in front of the Air and Space Museum and getting out.
Well, it would be even nicer, Dottie, if we could only take off here at Captain's Cove where we are right now, take off, fly around here, and land it back here, because I'll tell you, this vehicle takes off in very short landing areas, and it lands in equally as short an area. So who knows? We have a heliport license here at from the state of Connecticut. Maybe we'll have a Whitehead plane operation working out of the Captain's Cove.
Well, with people like you and Andy and Scott behind it, I don't doubt it at all. So if there's anything that I could do to help you people, I'd be happy to be called in to do my share, because it means a lot to me, all of this.
Good enough. You'll be on call, because
Okay.
anybody that volunteers. Of course, incidentally, if there's anybody that watches this program and has any documentation whatsoever from Whitehead, as Andy said before, let's see it. We may not have it, but it might help.
Great. Thanks so much for taking the time today. It's been fun. Andy, was there anybody else who's been credited with father of flight before the Wright brothers?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, the secretary of the Smithsonian, Samuel Pierpont Langley, was considered to be the father of flight back in the good old days previous to the Wright brothers. And what he did was he had a model that flew very well, a model powered by a steam engine. And when he made a full-scale replica of this model, he tried to fly it off of a houseboat, launch it off a houseboat, but it went into the Potomac River. And he did this on 2 separate occasions. And this was just a short while, a few weeks, as a matter of fact, before the Wright brothers flew. So he was considered to be the father of flight, and the Smithsonian considered him to be the father of flight even after the Wright brothers flew.
It seems a shame, though, that everybody's arguing over who the first person in flight is, when we maybe should be concentrating on giving credit and investigating and learning more about all these early experiments.
Well, I agree with you on that. I think we should look into a lot of these other men, but since Gustav Whitehead is our main interest here,
Because he lived here, of course.
This area, we certainly would like to see him get credit for what he did. And a lot of the people in this neighborhood did see Whitehead fly up and down the streets, and why the Smithsonian doesn't believe that, I find it, I just don't understand.
I was very taken back with that myself at that original lecture that I heard in 1982, you tell me, when I heard some eyewitnesses sitting around me telling me that they were present.
They saw Whitehead fly on different occasions.
And that
sure.
fascinated me, and that's why I've still been interested to today to know more.
Well, let's find some pictures of him in the air and someone's diary describing it right here in this Bridgeport area, and I think that'll be pretty good proof.
Be a big help. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, Holly.